The Invitation by Gabriel Comba. To whom it may concern, I am writing this letter to you concerning the events which took place on the night of October 27th, 1953. This harrowing incident will cease to dissipate from my memory. My worries have not yet settled, and I have come to terms with the dreaded realization that many of my questions will never be answered. If I had the chance to erase my mind completely, I would. I would have no qualms with the idea of losing everything I remember which gives me satisfaction or joy, for I cannot bear to live with the memories of what transpired that night. I have become the laughingstock of my town, the house not to walk by, the children's bedtime story, yet I thoroughly understand why they think this of me. These events are inexplicable, beyond belief, and to me, they are unending. And here they are, for you. I remember the day I received the envelope. The invitation read,
Greetings. You have been carefully chosen to attend a banquet in honor of the Miller family's estate on the 18th hour of October 27th, 1 Terrace Lane. You will be celebrated for your contributions to our cause.
I was puzzled by the details of this letter, as I had never heard of a family who had the surname Miller. Along with that, I had no idea as to why I had been chosen. The letter was signed by no one. Although I had no idea what this letter was concerning, I decided that on the afternoon of October 27th, I would head into town to try and find this address. While I was lost in town, a meek voice spoke to me, coming from a man who was seated on a park bench.
You are looking for Terrace Lane?
He locked eyes with me and stared silently.
Yes. Where could I find it?
He pointed to a pathway between two abandoned warehouses and said,
Follow that trail right there. You'll find it.
I left the odd man and followed the pathway into a forest, which eventually led me to the giant manor. I walked up to the door, knocked 3 times, and it would only take 5 seconds for a panicked woman to swing the door wide open.
You're late,
she whispered, taking me by the arm and leading me through a main corridor. We came to a grand hall, and before I could say a word, I was seated. Although I was among strangers at some oddly shaped table, I did recognize one person there. It was when he stood up along with others that I realized he was the man who I had talked to on the park bench. He began to introduce himself as the host. As his eyes focused on me, I remembered how uneasy his stare made me feel when we had met. I began to look around at those who were standing behind him. I did not know a single person in this room, and I started to wonder why I had never been asked for identification when I first entered the hall. One man, who was 2 chairs down from me, spoke softly, saying,
I had never heard of a Terrace Lane before today.
The guests began to nod in agreement, and as they did this, the host walked to the main doors, shutting them firmly. As he turned back to us, he jumped at the nearest man, opened his mouth, and bit down on their head. All the guests got out of their chairs, watching as the exposed teeth of the host began to sharpen while tearing into the scalp of the shrieking man. I turned to my right and watched how the host's acquaintances stood perfectly still, all with blank expressions as their eyes turned in our direction. All of the guests ran, trying to make it for the door, but finding that it was jammed shut. A searing ring of sound filled the air and left all of those in the room disoriented. I felt lightheaded as I watched the chaos ensue. I eventually found it within myself to run for the window, and as I leapt through it, shards of glass ripped through my skin as I fell down to the dirt below. When I awoke, I was still next to the house. A voice I hadn't heard before whispered from the window I fell through. As I got closer, I looked into the grand hall. 10 creatures sat around a table, feasting on a mangled pile of steaming flesh. They were hideous red beasts. The dismembered bodies of all the guests were piled on the table, and I couldn't help but process what my fate would have been if I hadn't jumped through that window. The host's body continued to mutate and transform into a strange, contorted form. The hall looked different as odd instruments and tools that I had never seen before began to slide their way down the long table. I watched in horror as these tools were used in unimaginable ways. Afraid of being seen, I found it within myself to quietly get away. As I ran through the forest, I heard a deafening screech as a giant cylinder took off into the night sky and disappeared in the dark. As I looked back from where it took off, the house was gone.